Hey guys, welcome to your Apple Update. I'm your host, John Sherritt, and on this episode, we're going to talk about the new iPhone. So last week at its September event, Apple unveiled some new iPhone models. We got the iPhone 11, the iPhone 11 Pro, and the iPhone 11 Pro Max. And I want to take just a second to talk about branding, first of all, because this is one of those things that generates conversation. Every time Apple has a new iPhone, what are they going to call it? And, you may love the new name, you may hate the new name. One thing I'm extremely happy about with this new name, whatever you think about the rest of the naming convention and the branding, I love that we're getting away from Roman numerals. I remember when, we kept hearing the rumors that Apple was going to come out with the iPhone 10 in 2017, and of course they did ship it, and of course the rumors were that they were going to use the Roman numeral 10, the X, and of course that leads to all sorts of confusions where users don't know when they see it whether to call it iPhone X or iPhone 10. Some people may think it sounds cooler to say iPhone X, even though Apple intends you to say 10. So it's just this big confusing mess. And I thought it was a bad move to go back to the Roman numeral. And we just gotten rid of Mac OS 10, which, for years, those of us who've been following Apple closely and using Apple products, it's been kind of like nails on the chalkboard to hear people say OS X. So it's OS 10 people. And so we got away from that. I thought Mac OS was a nice move because, of course, that kind of felt back to harkening back to the classic days of the Mac operating system. And then we jumped right back in with the Roman numeral for 10 in the iPhone 10 name. And last year, of course, we got the 10S, and we got the 10S Max, and then we also got the 10R, which was a new product that was kind of reminiscent of the iPhone 5C. If you remember back when Apple released the iPhone 5S, that was the flagship phone. And then they also released the 5C, which was basically just sort of a repackaging of the iPhone 5 in a plastic candy-colored coating. And the iPhone 10R kind of felt similar because it was something that was a less expensive model than the flagship Model 10S. They had bright colors for the casing. And of course they had that kind of unusual name, iPhone 10R, and of course people called it XR. So I'm really glad Apple moved away from that. So on the whole, I like 11, 11 Pro, and 11 Pro Max. I think that's a lot cleaner. And some of us have thought for years, I kind of miss the early days of the iPod, where you'd have the iPod 3rd generation and the iPod 4th generation and the iPod 5th generation, and that was such a clean, clear. For somebody who likes that kind of logical precision, that was a nice naming scheme. But I think, where there may be some people at Apple who might like that kind of numbering and naming for the iPhone series, iPhones are tough because it's something that has wide consumer appeal, and you've got to kind of make it where customers can understand just by hearing the name the differences between the different products. And so because there's a lot of key differences between the 11, the 11 Pro, and the 11 Pro Max. And so this kind of helps separate things out. It's cleaner, no Roman numerals. People aren't going to mispronounce it and say something else. So on the whole, I like the branding. I'm a big fan of that. Now, when it comes to the Pro word, of course, the word Pro is a tender subject for a lot of Mac users in particular, because there's been so much, in my opinion, unnecessary brouhaha about what it means to have the word Pro in, say, MacBook Pro. And I think people get, think way too much about this. On the one hand, Pro in terms of the new iPhone just means this is the nicest one. This has the highest features. I really like the way Tim Cook framed it in the announcement. I mean, they really framed it in such a way that almost said that, hey, the iPhone 11 is the main iPhone series this year. But if you want the phone with the latest and greatest, the cutting edge technology, and you're willing to spend a little more, here's the iPhone Pro and the iPhone Pro Max. So I think that way of kind of framing it is helpful for consumers and really helps explain the differentiation between iPhone 11 and what it means to have the word Pro in the name. And I think they also did a good job of selling that, really, especially around the camera features, both for still photography and videography, why you might say that that's Pro, because, and as we're seeing now from the people that have gotten their hands on review units, we're hearing, like, for example, The Verge, Nilay Patel of The Verge saying that this is the best camera ever put in a smartphone. So, you can love the name, hate the name. I think based on the way Apple's framing it, it makes a lot of sense, and I like it. And the camera, of course, that's a really big thing. So let's take a step back for just a second. So one thing that was a nice surprise is that the iPhone 11 starts at $699, not $749 like the iPhone 10R did last year. And especially since they're almost kind of framing it as this is the iPhone that most people should get, I love that they took the price down a little bit, actually, and I'm sure that has a lot to do with the fact that, well, there's a lot of competition in the smartphone market, which is great for everybody because it helps drive those prices down. But also, they have a lot of customers who are sitting on iPhones for several years now, because the iPhone, let's face it, is a pretty mature product. You probably don't feel like you need to run out and buy a new iPhone every year, because the one that you've had for a year, 2 years, 3 years is still running pretty well. It's still running the latest version of iOS. And while the new features every year are nice and you can see the benefits of them as Apple introduces them, they may not necessarily compel you to run out and buy a new one as often as you were when the iPhone was newer and they were really making giant leaps every year as far as what the capabilities are in terms of the processor and battery life and things like that. So, I thought it was great that we saw that price come down on that model. Of course, that's got the LCD screen and it's got the 6.1 inch size. So the size is a little weird because the iPhone 11 Pro is 5.8 inches. The Max is 6.5 and the 11 is 6.1, which is kind of where the 10S, 10S Max, and 10R were last year. So that's maybe a little odd because you've got to figure out the screen size. And you probably, if you're willing to spend up to $1,000 or more, depending on what you think of the screen size, you should probably go into the store when these are out and take a look at them in person and see which one looks the best and feels the best in your hand and you think is going to fit the best in your pocket or whatever, however you're carrying it. So take a look at that. But that's great. And, the iPhone XR, one of the nice things about it last year was that it had by far the best battery life I'd ever seen in an iPhone. And the iPhone 11 has even better battery life than that. And when it came to the iPhone 11 Pro and Pro Max, they were saying, I believe they were saying up to 4 hours more than the 10S models were the year before, which is awesome, and so they, the new ones are a little thicker, a little heavier. So if you were always kind of complaining about Apple's race to have the thinnest, lightest model, even at the expense of battery life, well, they're kind of, steering the car back away from that ditch, if you will. So, it's still not going to be a super heavy or super thick phone, but they steered the car back a little bit in that direction so that you got much better battery life. And I think a lot of people are going to love that compromise for sure. And of course, those cameras, when the 10R came out last year, it featured only the single camera, whereas the 10S and 10S Max had the dual camera where you had the wide angle and the telephoto lens. Well, this year, if you look at the iPhone 11 Pro, you've probably all seen that image of the 3 lenses on the back of the iPhone 11 Pro. So the iPhone 11 gets the wide angle and this new ultra wide, so you can really take a step back and get just a really expansive image in the camera. And you get that on the iPhone 11. Then if you step up to the iPhone 11 Pro, you still get the wide and the ultra wide, but you get the telephoto lens back on there as well. So, I love this whole camera arms race that all the smartphone makers, Apple included, are engaged in, because that seems to be like the cutting edge, the thickest, bloodiest part of the battle when it comes to the competition between these different phone models. And we as the customer get the benefit of, no matter what brand of smartphone you get, if you get a top-of-the-line smartphone, you're going to have a fantastic camera, and they seem to keep getting better and better every year, not only in terms of the hardware, but also in terms of the computational side of the photography. Because you're taking, because the biggest challenge that you have with a smartphone camera is that the lenses are small, and you want as big a lens as possible to let as much light in. And so when you don't have a large lens like you would on a big, DSLR camera, you've got to do a lot of tricks with computational photography to kind of overcome that. And it's just amazing what we're able to get with these smartphone cameras and smart, the computational side, not only the hardware, but the computational side of that as well. And so it was really cool to see the examples they showed of the photography. Again, The Verge is saying this is the best camera you can get in a smartphone. I think it's also interesting when you look at the fact that one of the criticisms that people have had of Apple over the years is that Apple is all about form over function. And we talked about the thinness and lightness that Apple seemed to be rocketing toward every single year with the iPhone and with the MacBook Pros as well. And people have had some complaints about that as well. And so I think, when you steer back with that, you prove that narrative wrong, or that you at least say, hey, maybe that was true, but we're correcting that and we're making a little more of a compromise in the direction of performance. And it's interesting when you look at that 3-camera system. And, when the first iPhone, the iPhone 6 that had the camera bump, Apple photographed that in their marketing materials in such a way that they kind of hid it. So it's like they were ashamed of it. They didn't want to show it. They hated the fact that they had that camera bump sticking out and it wasn't just a flush back. And after that model, they've just owned it. And you can really see every single image, it seems like, of the iPhone 11 Pro is this zoomed in on that protruding, camera, area on the back corner of the iPhone. They're proud of it. They're owning it. They're saying, look at what we've got. And so, it's almost like Apple can't win, and you can't win with everybody because, when you try to make it as thin and light as possible, you get accused of form over function. And then when you have the 3 cameras sticking boldly out on the back, people say it looks ugly or like a stovetop or whatever. And Apple wants to make it as beautiful as possible. Probably their idealized vision would have it be, flush with the back, but they want you to have the best camera possible, and they're going to be proud of the cameras and have it in every single image they take of it. So, if you go out and buy an 11 Pro, you're going to love it. So I think, the question really comes down to, do you need it? Is this the phone for you? And I think that really probably depends on where you are in the iPhone upgrade cycle. I've talked to a lot of people in the last several days just because they know that I do this, that I'm a big fan of Apple's products, and they've asked me questions about it. And I've asked them, hey, what phone do you have? And I've heard a lot of people say they still have an iPhone 6S. And again, that's a testament to how well that phone was built and designed, that people are still using it these years later. But if you're someone like that who's rocking a 6S, then yeah, it's a great time, and you're going to see a giant upgrade. And probably the iPhone 11 is enough phone for you. Now, if you want to have the cutting edge, the best of the best, especially with regard to the camera, then jump up to the $999 iPhone 11 Pro, and again, you're going to have an amazing photography experience in your pocket. So I think that's where you are. If you bought a 10S or a 10S Max last year, you probably don't need to go out and buy a new iPhone 11. Again, unless you just want to every year have the best camera possible. I think that's the biggest reason why somebody might want to do a year-over-year upgrade. But otherwise, you're probably good with the phone you had last year. I'm still using an iPhone 10, and most likely I plan to continue using that this year. I don't plan on upgrading to an iPhone 11. But if it was the right time for me based on what I had, then it'd be a great phone for me to step up into. One thing, if I have any complaint about the new iPhone 11, I don't like the color choices as much this year. And again, you can't please everybody with color choices, and probably there's lots of people who weren't happy with the color options last year. But this year they kind of went with more of a pastel color palette for the iPhone 11, whereas last year the XR had more, bolder colors. I love that big, bright, bold blue color they had last year, and the iPhone XR is still available at $599. So if you prefer that color, you're still going to get a great phone at a great price with those colors, but maybe you love the pastel colors. I don't know. And then on the 11 Pro, they introduced this new color we haven't seen on a flagship Apple iPhone, which is this, what do they call it? Midnight green, I think. John Gruber described it as looking like Boba Fett, the bounty hunter from Return of the Jedi and The Empire Strikes Back. So I want to see one of those in person to see what it looks like. It looks very cool in the images and videos that we saw last week out of the event, but I want to see it. But that's my thoughts on the iPhone 11 and the iPhone 11 Pro. What do you think? Are you planning to upgrade this year? Which color would you want to go with if you were going with one? Leave me a comment. I'd love to hear from you. I'm John Sherrod. This has been your Apple Update. I'll see you next time.